the lady, let's call her Lucy, that is too scared to go out of her apartment that was broken into last week and she had her car torched, she said she was frightened to have her picture taken because of the feminists. Because if she spoke out, she would be labelled a racist and they would hunt her down. So the feminists are now working against the women of Sweden, and they call them the extremists now. Feminists are the new extremists in Sweden, and they are part of the problem, part of the mafia that are silencing the problem that Trump, thankfully, spoke out about.
Yeah, it's not so different here. I mean, our media, as you know, worked feverishly to downplay any reports there might be a problem in Sweden. They're dishonest and politically motivated, so that wasn't surprising. What is surprising is how many Swedes are apparently afraid to say what they really think about what's happening there. Why is that?
Absolutely. There's this absolute belief, 80 years of liberal politicians, there's an absolute belief that Sweden is utopia, and that's the only message you can send. There's absolutely mandatory belief in multiculturalism. Eritrea, Somalia, Afghanistan, they don't just arrive in Sweden and then miraculously, you know, join the multicultural dream. No, they bring every war, every fight, every hostility with them. And there in Rinkeby, in Sweden, you have the Eritreans who hate the Somalians, who hate the Afghanis, and that's just brought with them. And we have the same in Calais. When I went to Calais to address the migrant situation, they're exactly the same. The Somalians don't speak to the Eritreans, who don't speak to the Afghanis. And absolutely, Sweden won't acknowledge that. They won't acknowledge they've got a problem, because that would mean admitting that everything they've believed in, multicultural ideas, are wrong, and that they shouldn't have let in 200,000 people in 2 years, and they're about to let in another 400,000 over the next 4 years. So this problem is not going away.
They'd rather destroy their own country than be called racist. I recognize that.
Well, in the 60s, America, for the first time, had to face its sins, the sins of the past, the racism, the slavery, the sexism, and so forth, the militarism, and a very negative view of America came into being, and America was in need of moral authority to function as a legitimate society.
Right.
And this is where we evolved the liberalism that we still have today, which gives us a cover against that shame, a way to function in America and be, in a sense, above shameful America. Thus the sort of note of superiority in today's liberalism, this sort of moral superiority. We are the good. And regular, everyday Americans are still associated with that evil past and cannot be trusted. This, I think, has a lot to do with the vitriol in regard to Donald Trump. Really are adhering to an identity, to the idea of my personal self. I am the kind of person who is above racism, who is above sexism. And if you take that position there that I don't like, then you are challenging not just my ideas, but you're challenging me as a human being with a particular identity. And that is why the passions, the ferocity of the left that we see today in the streets and elsewhere.
There's really no debating people on the basis of that, because you're not really talking about ideas or policies.
No, there's a complete shutdown of any honest intellectual exchange because you are not threatening my ideas, you are threatening me. And I don't have the patience to be reasonable and argue with you on the basis of reason.
Yeah.
I need to literally extinguish or annihilate you and your position. You see the anti-Trump sentiment in many ways. Annihilate him. There is nothing redeeming in this man.
Right.
And so forth.
Boy, you're seeing that.
And because liberalism is an identity.
Shelby Steele, one of the smartest pieces I've read in a long time. Thanks a lot for coming on tonight. So what is the core cultural difference that creates the political divide between rural and urban voters?
I think it has a lot to do with speech and deeds, thought and action. That people in the country, they tend to be a little bit more isolated, and how they dress or how they sound are not as important as what they do. So we've We've gone now a half century with this best and brightest paradigm where your zip code or your income or the brand of education that you're stamped with is supposed to mean something, and we take that for granted. And people out in the country tend to be a little bit more autonomous. They pump their own water, they deal with their own sewage. So a man or a woman that can repair a hydraulic ram in 10 minutes or get on their belly and take out a transmission, that takes a lot of skill, and it takes a lot of intelligence and ingenuity. And we haven't valued that because we are in this paradigm. You leave this Tony prep school, then you go to an Ivy League or a Stanford, and then you get branded, you go to DuPont Circle, Upper West Side, and we consider you wise. And the people in the interior said, well, wait a minute. We're $20 trillion in debt. You can't speak on a campus without being shouted down. We've got the worst economic growth. Who are you smart guys that gave us that?
Exactly.
We didn't do it. Somebody did. And so I think that they want to judge people with what they do rather than what they say or how they look.
Let's hammer out what are the basic principles of free speech, more or less for ourselves, and then let's circulate it among the faculty and see if there's some agreement here. And you know, it took us only an hour to sit down and say, well, what, you know, in 1776, America fought the battle over free speech. These are Enlightenment values, and I'm kind of a free speech fundamentalist, and I believe that the function of the university is to provide a place where those with every viewpoint, left, right, center, and now, of course, it's like the rainbow. There's so many, even on the right and the left, there's obviously a zillion different opinions. I think a university should be, if nothing else, a place, a space, shall we say, that contemporary phrase, a space, where free discourse can happen, where ideas can clash, people can disagree. And I actually think we're at such an amazing inflection point in American culture right now, because I think people are, I know I am, utterly fed up with the coarseness, the incivility of discourse in the United States. I think we've come to a point, this inflection point, where we have to step back, all of us who are rational human beings, whatever our political viewpoints, whatever candidates or parties we stand for, and say to ourselves, what are the basic principles we agree on here? I mean, we organized ourselves as a nation a couple hundred years or more ago, saying this is a place where we get to talk freely about our ideas. We set up these universities based on Enlightenment principles, and we supposedly adhere to them. I mean, I hope and believe that my own classrooms are a place where students can challenge me and feel free to challenge me. They don't shut me down, and I never shut them down.
Amen. What?
Modesty. Why should we be modest? I mean, I have a lot to be modest about. I don't know that much. None of us do. You don't. I don't.
Exactly.
We all. Robert Frost. I did a biography of Frost 20 years ago, and I love his phrase. He said, we all proceed on insufficient knowledge.
Exactly.
And I think you proceed. I mean, here you are. I'm sure debating a million people, going over a lot of ideas. You proceed on insufficient knowledge. I'm not accusing you of that because
no, you're right. I do. Of course.
I proceed in my life on insufficient knowledge, and that's why we have to be modest. And I mean, I think we have to actually teach people modesty.
Yes.
And I think that's one thing that's where we have failed. And the problem is we're not really, frankly, seeing modesty anywhere in the culture very often.
No, and that's the key to parenthood, is raising children who know what they don't know.
Modesty. Why should we be modest? I mean, I have a lot to be modest about. I don't know that much. None of us do. You don't. I don't.
Exactly.
We all. Robert Frost. I did a biography of Frost 20 years ago, and I love his phrase. He said, we all proceed on insufficient knowledge.
Exactly.
And I think you proceed. I mean, here you are. I'm sure debating a million people, going over a lot of ideas. You proceed on insufficient knowledge. I'm not accusing you of that because
no, you're right. I do. Of course.
I proceed in my life on insufficient knowledge, and that's why we have to be modest. And I mean, I think we have to actually teach people modesty.
Yes.
And I think that's one thing that's where we have failed. And the problem is we're not really, frankly, seeing modesty anywhere in the culture very often.
No, and that's the key to parenthood, is raising children who know what they don't know. And I'm quoting you. I'm a proud Latino immigrant here in the United States. You know exactly what is going on here in the U.S. There are many people who do not want us to be here and who want to create a wall in order to separate us. But you know what? This is also our country. Let me repeat this. Our country, not theirs. It's our country. Who's the us and who's the they? Whose country is it?
This is our country. It is yours, it is mine, and it is ours. The interesting thing is that with the Trump administration and many people who support Donald Trump, they think it is their country, that it is a white country, and they are absolutely wrong. This is not a white country. This is not their country. It is ours, and that's precisely what I'm saying. Look, in 2044,
wait,
in 2044, this country, the white population will become a minority. It will be a majority country. That's precisely what I'm saying. Latinos, Asians, African Americans, whites. It is our country, Tucker.
Right. Yeah. Well, let me just point out that you are white. Obviously, you're whiter than I am. You've got blue eyes. So, I mean, I don't know exactly what you mean by white or Latino, but let me just ask you again to explain our country, not theirs. Who is they? Whose country is it not?
Well, many people who want to go back to 1965 when there was a white majority. Many people who believe that Latinos and immigrants and refugees shouldn't be here. That's precisely what I was referring to.
So it's not their country?
Before the election,
belong to those people? What are you saying?
Well, it's also their country, but it's not only their country.
Right,
we have to understand that this is a multicultural, multiracial country, and we have to live and be tolerant. And that's exactly what I was referring to.
I certainly agree with that.
Country.
Now, I don't want to bring this to race. You did, so I'm going to follow up on that. You have posited yourself as the leader of Latinos, and I'm not exactly sure what that word means. So Latinos seem to encompass, I don't know, German Guatemalans and Italian Argentines and Afro-Cubans and non-Spanish speaking Peruvians and, I don't know, blue-eyed rich Mexicans like you. Western Europe is disintegrating. Its social fabric is in trouble, and there's been a ton of violence in a bunch of countries. People want to deny it, but it's real. Go there. I was just there. It's real. And it's happening because they moved a ton of people from that region, those countries, into their countries, and they're paying a massive cost for it. So it's not crazy to worry about this, and it's not Islamophobic to worry about it.
Are you talking about terrorist threats, or are you talking about cultural disruption?
I'm talking about terror threats. I'm talking about rioting. I'm talking about a massive spike in crime in a bunch of these countries. People lie about, but it's totally real and measurable. And so here's what I guess I object to at its core. You might think this is the best way to protect the country. That's legitimate. But to write it off as Islamophobic or bigoted for people to have these concerns is itself bigoted and dumb.
Okay, when you're looking at refugee admissions to the United States, for example, going back to the Refugee Act of 1980, that's brought about 3 million refugees to this country.
Right.
There's not a single refugee admitted to this country since the Refugee Act of 1980, that 3 million people, that has committed a fatal terrorist act against any American.
Really? But how many have been arrested?
That's a Cato Institute libertarian, as you know.
Oh, a think tank said it. Okay, then it must be true. But I've lived here too long to be impressed by that. But let me just say this. You can't
And it was also in the brief by the 10
So how many arrests of Somali refugees in Minnesota or their descendants have we seen in the past 5 years as compared to...
Again, you're talking about past... You're cherry picking...
Not cherry picking. There have been a ton of Somali refugees moved into Minnesota. A ton into Minnesota and Maine, and you've seen a massive spike in arrests for terror. I mean, I don't know.
I don't think that's true.
Well, of course it's true. How many arrests in Minnesota for terror were there 25 years ago? 0. How many are there now? Dozens. I mean, that's not an accident, is it?
I don't think that's the case.
Okay. I think it is. We're out of time, unfortunately. Email me. I'll send it to you. Thank you.
What I am doing is I am claiming space for lay people and people of good faith to be able to come to the table and speak to the scholars of Islam and speak to the religious authorities and really kind of stake out a new area where we can actually engage in a dialogue between those who claim, this deep religious knowledge and those who simply want to be, sort of good moral, ethical agents as Muslims in the world.
Is there something intrinsic to Islam that produces violent behavior?
No, honestly, I don't think so. I think that there is a certain reading that allows for the violence, but what I think is that it's a particularly narrow and it's a reading that reflects a certain kind of upbringing. And I think that the readings of Islam, whatever reading you're coming out with, is going to be related to the socioeconomic background that you are either coming out of or you were exposed to. So if you look at somebody like Osama bin Laden, he had all of the advantages possible. He had as well a cosmopolitan life. He had this education. He had money, and yet he was looking at the Arab world and said, "Oh, there's this tremendous injustice that's taking place. I must now fight in whatever way he thought he could." Now, that is a particularly worrying example of how things develop. We all sort of are witnesses. The privileged within Arab society and Muslim society are witness to the socio-economic catastrophe of the Arab world in particular, and parts of the Muslim world. And what I want to say is that actually there are much more positive ways in which we can begin to react to that socioeconomic reality. It's people like me and my generation who are very privileged who should be taking steps to alleviate the suffering of fellow Muslims and to really sort of re-establish a semblance of economic kind of well-being and a functioning state in different parts of the Arab world and North Africa.
So can a Muslim who takes his religion seriously, an Orthodox Muslim, be tolerant of people who aren't Orthodox Muslims?
I think it's, I know many Orthodox Muslims who are quite happy to accept that the world is full of many different nationalities and cultures and religious faiths. So not only do they tolerate, those of weak faith within Islam, but they're quite happy to accept that there are non-Muslims in the world. So again, these are particular readings, and I think that what we need to do is, there is, I believe, a silent majority of Muslims who really believe in a much more productive engagement with the modern world. Now, do they have the theological arguments? Do they have the philosophical arguments to kind of stand up to the incredible pressure put on them by the radicals? This is a different question, and that's the kind of contribution that I was trying to make, that there must be a set of arguments, kind of rules of thumb for how to push back against the very strong radical, small but very strong radical kind of interpretations.
And thank you for providing that. That's obviously necessary. Thanks, Ambassador, for joining us.
Thank you.
What I'm saying, under the last administration, run by whomever, were those people under surveillance by the U.S. government? It was the middle of a highly contested presidential campaign, and I think that's meaningful, and I think most people would agree with that.
And
we know for a fact. We know for a fact that General Flynn was monitored by the FBI and that illegally transcripts of his conversation with the Russian ambassador were leaked, resulting in his disgrace and the loss of his job. That seems like a big deal. Do you think it's not? Are you saying that stuff doesn't happen? Because it clearly does.
Well, let me ask you this. We, as a routine matter, often will monitor the communications of people like the Russian ambassador. Do you think that that's a bad thing? And yes, of course, sometimes that Russian ambassador will be talking to U.S. persons, and the intelligence community and the FBI have all kinds of protections to make sure that the U.S. person is protected.
Really?
In this case, as you know, Michael Flynn lied to the Vice President of the United States, who then, perpetrated that or perpetuated that falsehood.
How do we know that he lied? How do we know that he lied, Congressman?
Well, because he was fired, and he was fired.
But how do we know that how do we know what he said in that conversation?
Well, we don't know today what he said, but you do know that he was fired, and if I could just quote the White House...
Hold on, slow down, stop. You just said he lied, and my question is, how do we know he lied? What's the basis for making that judgment? How do we know what he said in that conversation? Because it was in a classified transcript that was leaked by someone in government with the effect of hurting Michael Flynn. That was a felony. And you're an American citizen, so am I. I want to believe that the U.S. government is not going to secretly collect information on me and then use it against me illegally for political ends. That is what they have done. You're fully aware of that.
Tucker,
you're in charge of the oversight of these agencies. And what are you doing about it?
First of all, you're making statements like they're doing it, and they're doing it illegally.
They did it to General
Flynn.
That
they're doing.
I'll give you. You showed me the proof. You said he lied, and you said he lied based on your knowledge of a transcript you should not have known about, and I shouldn't have known about either. And its release was a felony, and you know that.
Look, you are besmirching the FBI and the CIA and others if you say they did that illegally with no evidence, and you have no evidence.
So you tell me, as a member of the committee, imagine a scenario in which that transcript of General Flynn, who was then a private citizen, the release of that, the leak of that to the press was not a felony. You give me that scenario, since you're the expert on this subject.
The leaking was illegal.
It was. I thought you just said it wasn't, and I was besmirching them by saying so.
No. You said they were using the information illegally. If a warrant exists,
they were using it illegally when they leaked it.
The
as
leaker,
you just
of course.
Said, yes.
Of course.
The people you described as this. When you have a government that collects information, and we have all these standards designed, as you just said, to protect us, and how dare I question the protections? Those protections didn't work. And a guy, fairly or unfairly, had his reputation and career destroyed over this because someone didn't like him. That's the behavior of a third world government, of a police state, and I would think as someone in charge of the oversight, you would be very concerned about that, but you don't seem to be.
No.
The amount of data, both from the internet, from phone calls. And they are not supposed to be looking at the data of Americans without a warrant, as you know, but they collect all this data. And my impression is, from living here, that you guys who have the responsibility of oversight do not know how many Americans' data is picked up by these intelligence agencies. And my question is, why don't you know? And shouldn't you be interested in that?
So it's a really interesting question, and we're very interested in this. It's critical to oversight. So, for example, it won't surprise you to know that we have the capability, and quite often we will want to listen in on phone conversations that potential terrorists in places like Pakistan and other places around the world are having. We may want to look at the emails that potential terrorists are having. It won't surprise you to know that from time to time they might email or have a conversation with an American. And so when our intelligence agencies pick up that information, sometimes the information is either an American on the other end, or sometimes it's about an American. And so our intelligence community has an elaborate set of protocols to try to protect, and they're human, right? They don't always get it right, but they try to protect the information of those people who are U.S. citizens and therefore entitled to Fourth Amendment protections. Well, do they always get it right? No, they don't. But there are an elaborate set of protocols. Now, if you're calling,
sure that's right.
If you want to go the Edward Snowden route, because I'm hearing Tucker Carlson as Edward Snowden tonight.
Please don't call names. I'm asking you a sincere adult question. You're calling me Edward Snowden, which I'm certainly not.
I'm telling you that you've taken the position because you're now acting very critical about these.
Not at all. Not at all. I'm asking. I'm not being critical of the intel agencies. I'm being critical of you because I don't think you really know to what extent they're following those protocols, because I don't think that your committee has demanded and received a complete listing of the names of Americans, or at least a description of the Americans, the number of Americans who've been surveilled, intentionally or not, by these agencies. In fact, I know that you haven't. And my question is why?
Well, we do receive on a regular basis reports from the intelligence community of the intensity of when there are errors made.
When you have enormous power vested in these agencies under a Republican or Democratic president, you better be really careful nobody misuses that power, or else everything collapses and it becomes used as a political weapon, and that's really scary. But we'll have a Democratic president, and you'll feel the same way I do.
That's where you're wrong. First of all, I'm really glad, Tucker, that you're urging me to do good oversight. I appreciate that. Believe me, I feel the weight of that responsibility.
You should.
Quite a lot. But then when you go on to say otherwise it gets used for political purposes, that's just, I think the technical term is baloney.
Okay, let me ask you one last question. So the director of national intelligence, James Clapper, said yesterday on television that there was, quote, no evidence gathered that he was aware of any collusion between the Trump campaign or Trump himself and the Russian government. Since you've avowed such respect for the intelligence community, I assume you'll retract your claim that the Russians hacked this election and that Trump is a puppet of Putin or whatever. This kind of ends the story, doesn't it?
So just so we can be clear, because this really kind of illustrates something about the Tucker Carlson show.
I went on the website, Day Without a Woman, to try and figure out what this was about. And one of the things I learned is that you're supposed to avoid shopping except at women and minority-owned businesses. In other words, if the business is owned by a white man, you can't shop there. You shouldn't shop there. Why the hostility toward white men? What do they have to? Why white men exactly?
Well, I don't think that it's necessarily hostility towards white men. I think it's more about being supportive towards women and towards minorities who are historically disenfranchised in this country, who are paid less, who are not treated as well in the workforce, who don't have stability in the workforce. So I don't think that this is about punishing white men. I think that it is about supporting women and people of color.
Well, sure. If you're boycotting white men, it's obviously an attack on white men. But that's not true, actually. So if you look at household median income, the top 3 slots are not white men. They're all people of color. I think the number 1 is Indians, and number 2 is Taiwanese, and the third is, I think, Filipino. So actually, white men are not making the most money in this country. I don't know if you've checked the numbers. So it's a little bit weird to say boycott white businesses, white male-owned businesses, when they're not the most successful. What is that about?
I think that if you were to look at the statistics, it is largely white men that are positions of power, as far as CEOs, as far as people in, power at various businesses, as far as people who hold the majority of leadership positions, who hold the majority of CEO positions for Fortune 500 companies. So, traditionally and historically and factually today, white men are in better positions when it comes to, workplace equality than.
But that's not actually true. I mean, historically, yeah, I think that's right. But if you want to speak historically, so the Department of Labor ranks this by ethnicity, and historically it was a country settled by British settlers. So if you run down the list, British Americans, English Americans, are number 41 for income. I'm not saying, white people are successful. They are, but it's much more complicated than that.
Why is it, answer this question, Tucker, why is it that you are so against big government on every issue except for when it comes to my uterus and my vagina? Can you imagine if the government was saying, let's legislate your penis? That is not ever going to be allowed by you or any of your male counterparts. And it is time that we get past this issue.
Talking points
that this
are
is
decades
no, these are not
old
talking
and not
points.
very
The talking
bright.
points.
Look, let me just can we get back to the issue of Planned Parenthood funding, and if you could just slow down the Jeremiah a bit. I want to ask you and I'm going to give up after this a fourth time. You're saying that Planned Parenthood does all these great things. The federal government is saying we'll continue to fund those great things, but we're really worried about the abortion part because, almost half the country thinks it's murder. It's not about genitalia; it's about a distinct human being. That's the view of a lot of Americans.
70% of Americans are pro-choice, and guess what? 50% of Donald Trump voters don't want Planned Parenthood to be defunded. And guess what?
But
abortion is also a critical legal medical procedure.
Really?
So let's talk about the domino effect.
Wait,
you
Jimmu,
take abortions away.
You're not going to answer any of these questions.
Okay, so then what? Because life is actually more complex than you want to talk about in this situation.
So if you take abortions away, hold on, slow down. Why should people who think abortion is immoral, and there are a lot of them, it's not 30%, it's much higher than that actually, it's about 50%, but it's still more than 5%. Why should those people have to see their tax dollars subsidize it? That's the question. And you're basically answering with a religious answer and saying it has to do with the autonomy of the woman.
Their tax dollars are not paying for abortions.
What is the problem?
You know
Why
what their
not give
tax
up
dollars are
abortion?
paying for?
I don't
They're
understand.
paying for low-income women to be able to go into a health center in a community that has no other health center available to them within hundreds of miles so that they can get a breast cancer screening.
Oh,
so
really? A
that
mammogram?
They
How
can
many
get
mammograms do they get?
STD screening. That they can get tested. And this is not only women. This is men.
How many? Are they giving a lot of mammograms at Planned Parenthood? How many do you think last year they gave?
I don't have that exact number.
I don't think
Tucker,
they did any, actually. I don't think they did any mammograms, did they?
Tucker,
or did they? It's a question for you. You were on the board of it, not me.
Let's be honest.
Do you not have the answer, Jimmu? I'm trying to get the answer from you.
Health centers in rural areas, in many communities where there are no other
How many mammograms
options.
are they providing?
No other
you were on the board. Wait, so stop with the propaganda. I'm asking you a specific question.
This is not propaganda. I'm trying to be honest with your audience. You're talking points to demean an organization that provides
I'm trying to get a straight answer out of you. All right. I give up.
Thanks,
Jimmu. I appreciate it. Get back to me on the mammogram question.